Okay, so we are live, and I'm just going to give people a minute to connect. We're on a number of channels. We're on 2 Facebook pages. We're on YouTube, Periscope, Twitter, and playing around with Twitch, but that's really for gamers, right? We've got someone on the queue as well, which is really cool. So I'll bring him right in. Why not? Hello. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Oh, he's just dropped off. He dropped off. Okay, not to worry. Changed his mind. Okay, so that's good. We're building up now. I got 29 people online already, so let's get started. So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, Joshua. I really appreciate you coming here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, John.
It's your second trip. So 1st of April, April Fool's Day. I think people didn't believe that we were going to have a live stream that day. We played around with, we did a webinar, and we had more people actually on the live stream than the webinar. So we're doing an experiment this time. This is pure live stream, but we're using StreamYard. So if you want to join, please look at the meetup page that you came through, either Lean Product Delivery or Lean UX London. There's a URL in there where you can check your setup, and you can also join, and you can ask us questions live on camera. So please only join StreamYard if you are intending to ask questions live on camera. Otherwise, and just enjoy on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you're watching from today. So thank you for that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit before Joshua gets started. Joshua is the main act today, and the talk is outcomes over output. I've got a copy of his book cover there on the front screen, so hopefully you can see that. That came out end of last year, Josh, was that right? Roughly December last year?
You know, it was actually a year ago this month. It was April of 2019 that the book came out.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, it was the other book I got mixed up with. Sense and Respond was the one that was later in the year. Is that right? Sense and Respond?
That one. So Sense and Respond was 2017.
Yeah. I got my facts wrong. I have to do my fact.
But it's so fresh and relevant that it feels like it must have been released just a few days ago.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So we have someone on the queue here. So Angel De La Mata is on the queue. So I'm going to bring Angel just in just to see if there's any questions. Is Angel? I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. You're on mute at the moment. How can we help you? Okay, the audio is off, so I'll just remove from the stream because maybe Angel isn't aware that it's a live in camera deal. I've got Aaron lined up as well. Aaron, welcome. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
So great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Where are you coming in from today?
Just outside of Toronto, Canada.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. I've never been to Toronto. I hear really good things about it.
Oh, we'd love to have you.
So, have you any questions already for Joshua before we get going?
I'm just getting organized here with my team.
Okay.
Just need a moment or so.
Yeah, no worries. So I'll come back to you later on. I'm going to give a little bit of a warm-up talk, and I'll come back and check in with you, Aaron, before we get started. I'll come back to you as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so Joshua, I'm going to give a little talk now, and one of my, I guess, bugbears is leadership, executive leadership in particular, and it's something I've been working on for the last few years. And as recently as 2017, one of the things that I used to talk to executives about, maybe I wouldn't use to talk about the same things right now, but I used to talk about, can we limit work in progress? Can we reduce the amount of work that's in the system? Try to manage the work, not the workers. That was one of the messages that I used to give. I'm not saying that was the right message, but that's what I used to give back then in 2017. And the other message was about leaders being coaches. Can leaders become coaches? And in addition to that, are there any limits to growth in the company? So we might think we can scale our way out of any problem. We scale up these teams, but actually, is there a team over there that we're all depending on? And actually, there's a limit to the growth there. So we can only go so far. And these are fairly simple messages, but actually, for a lot of leaders, it's a difficult message because depending on the culture in the organization you're in, the industry you're coming from, limiting work in progress is actually kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big thing to ask for, because in a lot of companies, efficiency is what gets measured. Efficiency is good. You just need to make sure you're doing the right thing. So I have a preference for being effective first and efficient later. So try to make sure you're doing the right thing. I think Russell Ackoff said the same thing, a famous systems thinker. And there's lots of debate about that. And of course, here today, where the Joshua's talk is outcomes over output. So I've been training on this course I gave today, Professional Scrum at UX, and for the last year, I guess, roughly. And one of the things I really love about Lean UX is that essentially it's a way of building up evidence about whether you should build anything. And I wanted to talk to people today. I'm going to go to my flip chart shortly. I'm going to switch cameras and go to the flip chart. I just want to talk about what I discovered, in particular in the last few months. I had kind of a eureka moment, maybe I'm a bit of a slow learner, but one of the things that I discovered was that a Lean UX workshop is quite a good leadership workshop. There's some learnings in there that many leaders could benefit from. So I want to switch over now and switch my camera. So I'm going to switch over to the my flip chart here. And so you should now see a flip chart, and I'm going to add a little bit of light on the subject as well. And I'm going to just zoom in on just the flip chart and Joshua for now. So if you've got any comments or questions, I'd be delighted. There's some comments coming through already, which is fantastic. Just have a quick look at some of them here. And so Corrado is saying hello all. Jerry is saying hi John, hi Josh. Thank you very much, Corrado. Thank you, Jersey. Chris is here as well, saying ciao. Thank you very much. Philip saying hello, Joshua. Richard Collins is on a couple of live streams back. Welcome, Richard. Hi, everyone. And Craig Broadman is here as well. So hi, everyone. Really looking forward to this. And oh, Richard, there's another comment in already. Yes, the last session was excellent. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And Nicholas is here as well, saying hi all. Hi, Nicholas. And Red Lemonade Curves. Big fan of the book. Oh, that's great. So keep those comments coming in. Some people are sending private chat messages as well. And after I'm finished my talk, I'll start looking at some of those private chat messages. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming in. And I'll be about 10-15 minutes just warming up for Joshua. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, so I'm going to move over and just add a little bit of light on the subject. So hopefully you can now see a flip chart, just adding a little bit more light to the subject as well. Just adjusted the camera a little bit too much. And Joshua, that looks clear to you. You can read the page, okay? Good.
Yep, looks great.
So this is a curve known as the truth curve. The concept was originally from Gift Constable, but there's some adjustments made in this version. And this is a slide that I love showing at the start of a Lean UX workshop and at the end of a Lean UX workshop. What happens a lot of the time with lots of organizations, we just go and we do a public release. We just build it and they will come. And we might even scale after it and then optimize. Sometimes we might do beta or price test before that, but a lot of the time, particularly when teams are using Kanban or Scrum, if they don't have a kind of a discovery or a kind of UX type mindset, what could happen is the teams will be using their product backlog as a list of things that will deliver some potential value. And the key point is that we don't know if we've got value until we've got some feedback from customers and end users about whether there's really value there, and also maybe from some business stakeholders, but ideally from the market. So what I like about this, chart is on the horizontal axis here, you've got how much effort, how much investment are you putting into this product or service that you're about to go on. So starting with conversations, just chatting with people, there's a technique to doing customer interviews. We tend to write scripts so we don't lead the witness and all that kind of thing. You can do paper prototypes. You can do higher fidelity prototypes. You could also do fake, you could have a landing page. You could have a fake door, like on an app, for example, where you click on a button and then it says, oh, you need to ring this number to use this service. You might feel disappointed as an end user, but actually that bank has now got confirmation that you would have clicked on that. So it's given them some more evidence that they need to deal with that. Good to see more people joining the StreamYard queue as well. So welcome, John Clear. Can't pronounce Joe Lima's name. Sorry, you might correct me when I get back to you. And Aaron is still there as well. And the comments are still coming through as well. Thank you for that. So with Lean UX, what we tend to do is we tend to, I used to be very nervous about prototypes before. I had a bias, a very strong bias, because 30 years ago, I was working in a software development company and the prototype ended up in production, and we ended up maintaining that, and it was really expensive. And that's not the kind of prototype we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is something that simulates the user experience. It looks like it's going to work. And it looks like it's going to work, but it's just something visual that allows us to get some feedback and maybe do some testing with the user, see how would they interact with this service or with this product. Wizard of Oz is an interesting experiment. So you've probably all seen the movie The Wizard of Oz, 1940s movie, and hopefully you're familiar with the character Dorothy, who was a little dog, and she went to see the wizard, and but Dorothy had a little dog. Can't remember the name of the dog, but he pulled back the curtains where the projectionist was playing the wizard on screen. It was like I think it was like some mad professor or something like that. And he was pulling levers, so basically the wizard was fake. So with Wizard of Oz, classic one would be Amazon Echo, where they had someone like Alexa in the next room, and I think she was doing some kind of Google searches or some kind of searching. So if you said, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow, then she would actually do a search. There was no software behind that, but the user experience was tested through Wizard of Oz. Also, I believe Zappos, when the founder was trying to figure out would people buy shoes online, he built a website. There wasn't any full supply chain like that. I think emails were sent to him when somebody would order some shoes, and so an order would come in, and he would go down to the high street, buy those shoes, and pack them up in his Zappos packaging and send them off. And he had proved that there was something to this. So what Zappos did, what lots of other companies do, is they actually tried to spend some time trying to figure out the need and the solution. What's the need? What's the solution? What's the need of the business? What's the need of the customers and end users? And should we even build this? Is this something we need to even build? What happens in so many companies is that they treat UX like UI, as though it's just like a widget creation factory, which is not the whole point of UX. It's about user experience design, research, understanding the customer need, the customer wants, the end user wants, the business outcomes, the problem we're trying to solve. Is it even the right problem that we're trying to solve? The cheapest experiment might be just making a phone call, a 30-minute phone call, just checking in with people who are actually using your system. You can also do a price test. People might like the product or service, but they're not really willing to pay for it. So how much are they willing to pay for that? So that's a kind of an interesting thing. You could actually discover that there's lots of evidence. So as you go through here, hopefully your evidence is building up as you're putting more effort into confirming what the market is looking for. But equally, you could find out that actually, as you do put more effort in, you're discovering that the market doesn't want this, and you actually need to pivot. So you might need to go back to the drawing board and start off with some other experiments, and then come through with other prototypes and so on. So the first part of this true curve left of the price test is, should we even build this? And if you don't talk to anybody, you're just in fantasy land. That's the land of wishful thinking. If you look at the right-hand side, it's really more about product market fit. Okay, maybe there's a product here, but will people buy? Can we actually make a business out of this? And what I really like about this, I think this really solves a problem for leadership in one sense. And this, I'm not sure if this was the original intent, but this is what I saw from my lens when I was looking at Lean UX. When you're doing lots of testing with users and the market, you might find that you shouldn't build it at all, actually. And so instead of every idea that comes through here ending up in development, actually, maybe some of it should just be cancelled. And that's the real power of the truth curve. And I would ask each of you, how much effort in the work that you're doing, whichever product or service you're doing, how much effort did you put in? How much evidence have you acquired? Are you underneath this curve? In which case, are you kind of down here where you actually went almost the whole way, but you've very little evidence, so you made a huge bet, actually. And so a huge bet could have a huge win, but could also be a huge loss. And you could maybe have risked more than maybe the company needed to risk. So this is something that I find really, really useful. I think it's something leaders should check out, that with Lean UX, not only is it an opportunity to make sure that we build awesome products and services and we learn as we go along, or learning as the first citizen. It's not just about that. It's also about some ideas should never be born and they should never actually get through. And in a sense, you're limiting work in progress for free. It's a great way to just reduce the workload in your system. And so that's all I wanted to talk about today. I'm going to go back now and look at the comments on the board. I'm going to switch cameras. So while I do that, I'm just going to turn on the lights so I don't blow your eyeballs out when I switch cameras, because I don't want you to get dazzled by the camera. So I'm just coming back now to my other camera. Josh, before I go to the comments and the people on who want to join us on camera, do you have any comments on what I've just said? Okay, Joshua isn't on at the moment, so maybe I need to bring Joshua back in. So Joshua, any comments on what I've just said?
No, I think that's a useful model. The basic notion of that truth curve is that you want to you're always trying to learn, and you're always adjusting the kind of what you're working on based on the amount of evidence you have for any particular investment. So yeah, very, very useful model.
Thank you. I'm going to go to some comments now. There's a lot of people commented. So David Pitchford, thank you, David, fellow Irishman indeed, from County Cork in Ireland. Thank you very much for coming. And I've got Eric Stark here as well. He says, cheers from Sweden. Welcome, Eric. And we've got Zara as well. He was on a workshop with me today. Welcome, Zara. Nice to see you back. We've got Ashley here as well. Toto, I'm not sure what that means. Sounds nice. And somebody
Toto's the name of the dog, John.
Oh, thank you.
The name of the dog was.
That's right. Let's go back to it. Yeah, thank you. And Chris Telwell also says it was Toto. So thank you so much, guys, for helping with that. Then we got Andrea Chow Corrado. So I think Corrado was on as well. So they're saying hello to each other. And I've got a comment here as well. I think it's a question, actually, from Ahmad Al-Husian. I hope I don't have made a bad job of your pronunciation of your name. So by prototype, you're referring to mock, just the UI which simulates the idea, pretty much, not so much a working prototype. There's a real danger with working prototypes. That's why I was so scarred from my past 30 years ago. I was put off prototypes for decades. It's really about, you could do high fidelity prototypes. You could even do fake door type stuff, Wizard of Oz type stuff, but it's not a full solution. It's not something that's fully working. You're just trying to test if there's something in there. So Ahmad, let me know if we've answered your question properly. So another comment here from Craig Broadman. I really like the Cars Direct MVP story to illustrate the Wizard of Oz MVP. I'm not familiar with that. So I must check that out, Craig. Thank you very much. And then Andrea says, hi guys, hi Andrea. And I got another message. Nice thought, the limiting whip, not building useless things. Exactly. Because we know from empirical data, several studies, that that 2/3 of functionality is rarely or never used. And I had an example only a couple of months ago where major functionality was built 2 years ago and was never used by anybody. So yeah, it's good to try and avoid some of that. Got another comment here as well from Catalina. Got a peek of Josh's work at ILA Medellin 2019. Want more? So you got some fans here, Joshua. That's pretty cool. And got another comment as well. John, could you share some reference on the web about the model that you introduced? Absolutely, yeah. Giveconstable.com, but I'll drop it onto the comments.
John, if I could, GIF has a terrific book in which he talks about this model. The book is called Talking to Humans, and you can find a link to that book at talkingtohumans.com.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Talkingtohumans.com. So I'll just write that into the comments box, talkingtohumans.com. And I made a typo because I never learned how to type properly when I was in university. Please, if you're going to university, please learn to type because you'll be looking at people like me. So I've just added that. Thank you very much. And Ahmad just came back and said, thank you very much. That answered the question. Fantastic. Thank you. And then Andrea had a question as well, I think. So that could be coupled with the use of job stories instead of user stories. Absolutely, yeah. So I'm a big fan of Clayton Christensen and his customer jobs to be on. God rest him. He died a couple of months ago. I'm not sure, Joshua, how much you use job stories, but I'm a big fan. What do you think of job stories?
I think they're great. I think there's a lot of religion around some of these techniques, and I think job stories and user stories are two sides of the same coin. So
yeah. Okay. We also have a couple of people who are ready to come on camera, so I'm just going to check in. I got more comments coming in as well, which is great. So I'm going to check in with John. So John, we're going to bring you in now. So hopefully you're ready. John, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Sorry, apologies. I wasn't expecting to be brought on there, but I do have a question for Josh that may be useful. Josh, I've been reading the book actually just recently, even this morning. I was listening to some podcasts about it as well, and I can see that it's quite important with regards to I get the concept of the outcomes over outputs, but obviously outputs are still important. You got to ship those outputs, you have to ship those products, and then before that, then you have the area of inputs. So if you don't have the inputs correct at the very start, you really can't get to that outputs and obviously define within those outputs what those outcomes are that you're going to measure. So my question really is, I suppose, the inputs area is not really an area that has been, I suppose, people haven't spent a lot of time in building a system for understanding the inputs area and what inputs you're putting in are correct or not correct. And I'm just wondering, Josh, is that something you've come across yourself, or have you tried to define the best way to create the correct inputs? Because, shit in will be shit out, later on down the line if you don't get those inputs correct. So I suppose the question is slightly going beyond the book, for outputs over, or for the outcomes over outputs. But I suppose I'm just really questioning that inputs area at the moment. And do you have any systems for them which build better roadmaps?
Sure. So, I want to just respond quickly to the first part of what you're saying. I think the title "Outcomes over Outputs" it's a little bit provocative, but it is not meant to suggest that outputs are not important. It's not, it's not outcomes versus outputs. Yeah. As you said, you need to do stuff to make an impact in the world. But the thing that we're focused on is what's the result? Not, if we can make less stuff and have better results, we would pick that, right? In terms of inputs, it's not really language that I use. So can you tell me what you mean when you say inputs?
So, that initial stage where you're deciding on the project and you're going to start building a roadmap. So it's basically, what do you decide that you're going to start building as part of that roadmap?
So information into the system.
Correct.
Okay, good. Because it could also be, in some contexts, inputs are like the raw material, right? Yeah. So I think my thinking here is very, very much influenced by lean startup here. And so the sort of the kind of core notion in lean startup is that we're always operating in a situation where uncertainty is high, and we have to move forward with imperfect information. And so we could spend, I think there's a tendency in situations where uncertainty is high to try to analyze everything and figure it all out so that we get our inputs right before we start working. And that's a kind of an engineering model. It assumes a kind of a stable world in which cause and effect are predictable. But in complex contexts, cause and effect are not always predictable. So instead, the sort of lean startup approach is, let's assume we don't know what we need to do, and let's use our outputs as tests to see if we can create outcomes. So I believe in user research. I believe in market research. I believe you have to understand your customers and your users. And I believe you need to do that work. But I also believe you'll never finish doing that work. So you should assume that you're always doing it. And that part of what you're doing when you're making outputs is validating your inputs, right?
Yeah.
And you're validating them by seeing what the outcomes are, right? So that it's all kind of a loop. So that's sort of how I think about it, John.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Cheers.
Yep.
John, thanks very much. And I'll come back to you again later on. I'll send you a private message to see if you want to come back on, okay? Thank you so much. We got some more comments before we start, Joshua, if that's okay. So got a couple of comments here from Craig Broadman. So car direct example is from a guy called Bill Gross, founder of a company called Idea Lab. I have heard of Idea Lab, and Joshua's nodding as well. And the follow-up message from Craig as well. Thank you, Craig. There's also a 5-minute podcast from Bill Gross, an experiment on stage. So definitely going to check that out. So thank you very much for that. And we've got
great.
Yeah, and we've also got Charlie has got a question here. So how does discovery differ between figuring out what we should solve, figuring out whether we should solve this problem versus is this approach a solution that will solve this versus is this a solution that people will use? Joshua, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of relates to the classic double diamond model that designers are familiar with, where the first part of your work is to figure out kind of what the problem is, and then the second part of your work is to figure out what the solution is. I think you use different discovery techniques. I call all of that discovery, and I just think you use very different techniques depending on which part of the question you're trying to understand. The figuring out whether we should solve this problem, you can do a lot of observational research to understand that a problem is a problem, but to try and understand the value of solving it, you need to somehow quantify its impact. And so that tends to involve either, a strategic bet or kind of quantifiable, some quantitative research. Is this a solution that will solve this? That's the sort of classic domain of usability testing. And is this a solution that people will use? That's really where you have to start getting into kind of putting something out in the world and seeing if people will adopt. And that can be something as simple as like a landing page or a Kickstarter to see if people are willing to spend their money. Or it could be, some kind of functioning early version of the product that you put in people's hands and see if they actually use. So I think the distinction here, it's all discovery, but it's different techniques that you bring to bear.
Thank you very much, Joshua. I'm going to take maybe just 2 more comments, and I can see Johan who wants to come on camera as well, and then I think we should start. So there's a question here from Matthew Robbins. So any advice to bridge the gap between consultancies whose measure of success vary based on outcome versus output, i.e. the amount of story points, who happen to be working on the same project? Yeah, it's a wicked problem, isn't it?
So, Matthew, I think I'll try my best to answer your question. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I will say that, one of the challenges in moving generally from an output-based approach to an outcome-based approach is that we manage work traditionally in terms of output, right? And so in a consulting context, we actually write the output into our contracts frequently as the deliverables, right? That we will complete these deliverables and you will pay us upon delivery. Okay, there is very little room if you're operating in a contractual situation like that to shift away from deliverables because you've just signed up for deliverables. So what we used to do, I ran a consulting firm in the in the first half of the last decade that was really trying to work with our clients to generate outcomes. And we wrote all of our contracts as time and material contracts rather than as deliverable-based contracts. So I think that's the first thing, is to understand the incentives in the system. If the incentives in the system are about output, then you need to go back to those incentives and try and have a conversation that adjusts them so that you can change the way you're working.
Thank you. And there's a great website as well, agilecontracts.org, which is well worth checking out. Last fall, I got together with a legal guy and they came up with some analysis of different contract clauses and so on. So I'm just putting that onto the comments window, agilecontracts.org, I believe. So just putting that in there. And one more question from Andrea. Andrea, I can't pronounce your surname. I'm not sure. Is it Kochi? Don't you think this circularity between inputs, outputs, and outcome actually stiffs innovation? How can you take in extreme users?
Yeah, I don't think it does, Andrea. I think that you get innovation depending on how you set your focus. So if your research is about finding the average user, you're going to get one kind of result and you're going to serve one kind of population. If your research is about outliers, then you're going to find those extreme users and you're going to find new opportunities. So I think it's really, but in any case, right, you're looking at an extreme user, you're thinking about new use cases or new markets or new populations. You still have to validate whether there's a business there, whether the solution that you're putting into that new market is viable, whether it's desirable, whether you can build a business on it. So I think it's a question of sort of how you set the scope of your investigation and how you manage the things you don't know as you go through that process. Let me know if that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Joshua. Yeah. And I'm just going to take one person in from camera now, and we're going to get started because we should have started 10 minutes ago, but it's great that there's so much engagement, isn't it? So Johan, I'm going to bring you in now. Johan, you're up. I'm not sure if Johan is there, so maybe I'll come back to you later, Johan. Okay, thank you. So, okay.
I will, Sean, let me just pick up. Eric Stark put in a comment about Alan Weiss's book about value-based billing and value-based fees, and I endorse that.
Thank you. Lovely. So over to you. So Joshua, if you want to share your presentation, and thank you very much for coming.
Well, great, thank you. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, just sort of some of the fundamental ideas of outcomes versus outcomes over outputs, and then we'll come back to the Q&A. Thank you for all of those questions. Those were great questions, and we'll do some more of that before our session is over. In the meantime, I wanted to say thank you to John for having, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about how you might use outcomes in your work. If this is interesting to you, you can follow me on Twitter. @JSeiden is my Twitter handle. And you can, if you're interested in the book and you don't already have it, you can find it at bit.ly/outcomesbook. That URL is case sensitive. I wrote this book because I was working with a lot of agile teams. And one of the things that I heard frequently from these teams was that they wanted to be more outcomes oriented. You hear this a lot in the agile world, outcomes over output. It's kind of a slogan. It's sort of what I sometimes think of as mom and apple pie. It's a hard sentiment to disagree with. The problem with it is it's also a hard idea to put into motion. And I think the reason in my work, what I came to understand was that the reason it's hard to put in motion is that the notion of outcomes is pretty broad, right? Outcomes can mean lots of things. And we sometimes use it broadly as a synonym for results. And so what I wanted to do was to create a very concrete and specific definition of outcomes that helped teams work with them. Right. So what came out of that was this definition, and this is a very narrow definition. There are other definitions out there. We could talk about them if you like. The reason I like this one is because it's relatively easy for teams to understand and use. Okay. Here's the definition. An outcome is a measurable change in behavior that drives business results. The change in human behavior, your customer, your user, someone inside your business that creates value for the customer, creates value for the business. I want to give you a quick example of what I mean by this. I'm going to tell you a little story to illustrate this concept. This story takes place in the U.S., in the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'd like you to imagine that you are in this story. In fact, it is your job. You work in the government in this town, and you are responsible. You and your department are responsible for traffic safety. And so one day your boss comes to you, and your boss says, Josh, in this story, you are all named Josh. Your boss says, Josh, there's a dangerous intersection down at the mall. It's your job to get control of that intersection and make it safer. And so you go down to the mall and you stand around there and you take a look here at what's going on. And you can see that there are all these cars turning left, even though very clearly marked on the pavement is a no left turn arrow, right turn only. And there's also a T intersection. And in the US, you have to come to a full stop at a T intersection, but nobody's stopping. And so you come up with a plan, and you go back and you tell your boss, you say, boss, I'm going to put up traffic signs that say stop and no left turn, and that'll get that intersection under control. And your boss says, Josh, you're a genius, because this is my story after all. And so you do it. You work with the folks at the Department of Public Works, and you put up these signs. They're perfect street signs. They say stop. They say no left turn. And you and the folks from the department, you high five. You go down to the local tavern at the end of the day, and you have some beers. The next day, you go back to the intersection to see how your plan is working out, and here's what you see. So no one is stopping, and everybody's making left turns, right? So let's talk about this story now in the language of outcomes. And this is language that I've adopted from a framework called the Logic Model Framework. You can Google it. It's on the Kellogg Foundation website. And I found it a pretty useful model for this work. In our story, our boss came to us and said, Josh, I want you to create a safer street. That's what we'll call an impact. That's our highest level long-term goal. It is the result of many factors. In business, in our companies, these big important impacts tend to be profit, revenue, sales, customer loyalty, things like that, cost, right? The high level measures of business success. They're critically important. They're what executives care about, but they're big, long-term, and they're beyond what a single team might be able to influence, okay? So boss wants a safer street. What did we do? We went right to the intersection and we said, we know the answer. We're going to make this thing. We're going to make street signs. That's our output, okay? And very often in our work, this is what happens. We go straight from our high-level strategic goals straight down to making things. We're going to increase customer loyalty by installing a new CRM system, right? The problem here is that the thing we made did not create the outcome we were seeking. We were seeking to change customer behavior, change human behavior. We were seeking to get people to stop making left turns, and they didn't, okay? So we did not achieve our outcome. We made the output, that was our street sign, but we didn't create the outcome. That was to get people to stop making left turns. Now, there's something important to point out here, which is that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the output that we created, right? We made perfect street signs. They were on time. They were on budget. They were delivered. They met the specifications. They met every contractual requirement. They just didn't achieve the result. And so if you work in product development, you have no doubt had this experience of delivering successful output and then watching as it didn't achieve the outcome that you were seeking. And remember, that outcome is a measurable change in behavior that drives business results, okay? So I want to say a couple more things about this, and then we'll go to questions. I think teams often ask when we get there, when we get to this point, they say, okay, good, we get it. I understand now what an outcome is. How do I figure out what are the important outcomes for my business? In the book, I talk about three kind of what I call magic questions that you can use to find outcomes. Here are the three magic questions. You ask, what are the behaviors that drive business results? Okay. Second question, how can we get people to do more of these? And then third, how do we know we're right? Okay. Let me give you a quick case study of this, and then we'll come back to questions. This is from a project we did a few years ago for a New York-based nonprofit organization called Taproot Foundation. Taproot Foundation is in the business of helping other nonprofit organizations benefit from volunteers who want to help them. So these might be marketing professionals or human resource professionals or other kinds of skilled professionals who want to donate their time to nonprofits. What Taproot does is it matches willing volunteers, skilled volunteers, with nonprofits who've requested help. And then it runs a kind of a consulting engagement, 3 to 6 months long, to let these volunteers and nonprofits work together. So I got a call from a team at Taproot Foundation who said, look, we're planning our next year's work. We've been given a strategic imperative. We've been told that we need to increase the net promoter score of our business. We've been told we need to increase the net promoter score of our business. If you don't know what net promoter score is, it's basically a fancy way of measuring whether a customer is likely to refer you to another customer. And we won't get into, there's a lot of controversy about net promoter score. We won't get into that. But that's what this team was charged with doing. And so what they came to me is they said, look, we've been told to increase the net promoter score. In other words, create a high level impact. And we have no idea what we should be working on next year in order to do that. What is the stuff we should make? What is the stuff we should do? What are the outputs that we should create? And so the work we did together started with that first magic question. It said, what are the changes in behavior that will create the result that we seek? Right? What are the changes in our behavior, in customer behavior, that will increase Net Promoter Score? In order to understand behavior change, you have to understand what the behavior is in the system today. And so we started by mapping all of the behavior in the system today. That we made a kind of a sort of a service journey with 3 swim lanes. At the top were the people who were volunteering their services. At the bottom were the nonprofits who were consuming services. And in the middle was the Taproot Foundation. What were we doing? And we mapped that across the 4 project lifecycle phases. And then we went back through that and we said, what are the things that people are doing that predict they will be happy? In other words, that predict high Net Promoter Score. We marked those in green. And we said, similarly, what are the things that people are doing that predict they will be unhappy, that they would have lower Net Promoter Scores? And so now we had a map with all of the behavior in the system and what we thought were all the positive behaviors and negative behaviors. And then we went through and we prioritized. We said, which ones should we work on? And with that prioritized list, we had kind of our basic roadmap for the year, right? We said, look, we know that when people respond to email quickly, it predicts happy and satisfied teams. When people show up to meetings, it predicts successful projects. When people spend time socializing with each other, it predicts good things. And we knew those were the outcomes we wanted to work on this coming year. So coming back to the map, right, now we have our impact, increased Net Promoter Score. And we have our outcomes. That's our prioritized list. That's our roadmap. That's what we're going to do. Now, the last piece of that, or that's what we're going to try to influence. The last piece of that is, what are we going to make? And at this point, the team still didn't know. We were planning for the year. And I will tell you that that's actually a good thing, okay? Because if you know in perfect detail in October of 2019, what you will be doing in October of 2020, you are either lying to yourself or lying to your stakeholders, right? We do not have enough information to make that plan. Instead, what we need to do is build a list of hypotheses, right? Hypotheses are statements of what we think will work, right? We think that we can achieve an outcome if we deliver this feature to these users. And then our work for the year is this continuous cycle of testing, shipping, learning, sensing, responding, shipping, and learning until we get it right and until we achieve the outcomes that we're seeking. So these magic questions, what are the behaviors that create value? Those are the outcomes that we're seeking. How can we get people to do more of these behaviors? These are the features that we have hypotheses about. How do we know we're right? These are the tests and the metrics that we'll use to evaluate our work. All right. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening to that. I'm going to stop my screen share now so that I can see your questions. And John, we can come back to the Q&A.
Cool, thank you. So I've got a long question from Matteo DeVito, I think. So Josh, how do you feel about a dual track system where a part of the team is focused on outcome, composed of researchers, UX, design, product, and another part on output, engineers, UI, usability?
So I'm hesitant about dual track that is based on having different parts of the team specialized to certain activities, right? So if my engineers are always doing delivery and my designers are always doing discovery, and they're never crossing up, then essentially I've got two teams. I've got a discovery team and a delivery team. And I think what starts to happen is you lose shared understanding. So I much prefer a model where the team is moving through discovery and delivery activities together, in sync as much as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody works on everything together. But what it does mean is that when the people who are primarily responsible for discovery, so the researchers and designers and product people, they do not do that by themselves. They engage the engineers and the other folks. They bring them out into the field occasionally, maybe not every visit, maybe once a week, but engineers are out there in the field. Engineers are helping to build things that support discovery. Similarly, the designers are spending time engaged in delivery activities. They're, making assets and bits and code to help go into the shipping product. So, I think dual track is a little bit of an inevitability, but I think the anti-pattern is when you have one team in name, but two teams in fact. And so that's what I look for in dual track.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about today when I was doing a Scrum with UX workshop. There's a lovely pattern from Scrum.org where we found a way to balance learning and delivery. It's really, really nice. There is a little bit of a strain in certain parts, but overall it's really very well designed. So highly recommend that people check that out. You could do it with Kanban as well, of course. I've got another comment here, but I'm not sure if I showed it up earlier, from Eric Stark, I think. I think we did show this earlier. There's also a good book by Alan Weiss. Thank you very much for that. And got another comment here from Pradeep. So I'm just going to bring this up here. What's the difference? BW, I'm not sure what that means. Between a prioritized backlog and list of outputs. In essence, won't list of outputs lead to outcomes? So it's kind of the outputs and outcomes debate again, I think, Joshua.
Yeah. So so a prioritized backlog can include learning activities. Your backlog can be, every card you write can be a question. It could be a discovery activity. It could be a hypothesis. So lots of different ways to populate a backlog, and so that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is the whole point of this is that we know that outputs do not magically create outcomes, right? Outputs can be like a stop sign, right? Sometimes they do what we want them to do, and sometimes they don't. And so I think the teams I work on, we use two different ideas. We use the Scrum idea of done, right? A thing is done when we have built a shippable increment of something, right? But done is not validated, right? So we can make a stop sign, but the next imperative for the team is to figure out if that stop sign is doing what we want it to do. Is it making the intersection safer? And so the team has to continue to work there on the validation activity even after the stop signs are done. Okay. So the backlog then contains both stuff we're making and stuff we're validating.
Thank you, Joshua. I've got a question from Jersey Stavicki. I'm not sure. I'm sorry for I did a bad job pronouncing your name, Jersey. The approach you've described seems similar to OKR, with KR being outcomes, outputs being actions, initiatives, and impact being objectives. What do you think about that?
That's exactly how I think about it, Jersey. In fact, there is a slide later on in my deck that I did not show in the. Let's put that on the screen. I'm not going to show it, but yes, That is exactly how I think about OKRs. Is that a good OKR? The KR should be written as an outcome, right? And that the objective really is kind of an impact level statement. So yes, it's not. I would say it's not a hard and fast 100% mapping, but as a 90% of the time, I think that's really useful.
Thank you. And another one from Andrea. So the idea is to build multiple potential startups inside enterprises?
So yeah, so I mean, I like Eric Ries's, again, he's been a big influence on my thinking. He says a startup is a human institution designed to find a new business model in conditions of extreme uncertainty. And so, you know, in his view, a startup is a thing that's looking for a repeatable business model. I think those ideas are useful at the whole business level, but I also think those ideas are useful at smaller scales. So I don't think every team inside a large enterprise is a startup, but I think most teams are navigating some kind of uncertainty. What feature should we add next? How should that feature work? What's the best way to prioritize customer requests, right? So there's always uncertainty in the product development process. The question is kind of what's the scale? And so a lot of the time, the art is here figuring out how to use these ideas to test in the context of your uncertainty, which might be quite small scale, or it might be kind of existential at the business level.
Thank you very much. We have Craig Broadman ready to come on camera. So welcome to Craig. And Craig, you're up.
Hi, hi Josh, hi John. Josh, I've been following you for a little while since reading your Outcomes over Output book last year. So it's a pleasure to speak to you.
Nice to see you too.
I've sort of been following the Lean Startup for a few years. I've read some of the Sense and Response books, follow people like John Cutler, etc. And I'm trying to lead transformation in the organization I work for. That's been a bit of a marathon rather than a sprint, as I'm sure many other people can say.
It's only a sprint when people like me talk about it on stage.
Yeah. So we're making progress. I have access to exec level people to try and convince them to change things around. And certainly a lot further forward than what I was 2, 3, 6 months ago. But some of the resistance I find is the argument of the adoption curve. So a lot of our users might only use the system once every fortnight, once a month, and it can take time for the metrics to build up into a position where you're confident that you've made a difference. So I wonder how it's best to manage that long feedback loop, because on one hand, I want the team to stay with the outcome, to be measuring and looking at the results. But on the other hand, with it being a long feedback loop, they could just be getting on and starting another initiative and focusing on another outcome maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the really challenging problems of trying to apply this notion of validated that I was talking about, right? Like done is done, and we have some control over the timeline of done. And the smaller the unit of thing that we make, the more control that we have, and the faster we can be done. But when we put our things into the world, our users have a natural usage cycle, right? And so, I might be in an account. The example is always, I'm an accountant doing month-end close. I do that once a month, right? And so nothing I'm going to do is going to get me data from month-end close any sooner than end of the month. And so I think what you need to do is you need to understand kind of what's the natural rhythm of your business, and then kind of adjust what I would be looking for is, what are the things that we can measure quickly? What are the things that, take longer to measure, right? What's our decision-making cycle going to have to be? And then what's our work in progress look like for kind of validated, how much work in progress can we carry of unvalidated work? I don't know what the answers to it in your context are, but I would be looking to, if you don't have a giant user population and they only use things in a relatively slow rhythm, you're going to have to look for other indicators other than just usage data to try and get you validation.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Josh.
Sure, Craig. Thanks for showing up.
Thanks for showing. Thank you. Cheers, Craig. If you want to come on again later on, just let me know. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, got some more comments here. Santiago. So how to make the transition from a company focused on always delivering into a company focused on the outcomes? So I think it's focusing on delivery as opposed to focusing on delivering stuff versus delivering outcomes, I think is what Santiago is trying to say there.
Yeah, you have to, typically when I'm working with my clients, I try and avoid making this a big bang. What you want to do is you want to find one team that's willing to work this way and one project that kind of supports this way of, feels like it would benefit from this way of working, and start to pilot it that way. There's a little bit of a case study in the book about hbr.org, and that goes into some of the challenges that they encountered when they were trying to make their transition. They were a relatively small group. I think they had three product teams, and so they were able to transition all 3 product teams at the same time. But with a larger group, I would definitely be looking for a pilot.
Thank you, Joshua. What else you got? Just looking down here, I got Angel de la Mata. Just give me a nice smiley face. Thank you very much. Jersey saying, Angel de la Mata, right, we're in the same book and on the same page. It must be a private joke there. Richard Collings, welcome back, Richard. Love the idea of mapping out the process and adding the green and red cards. Yeah, I love that too. And to confirm my understanding, are these your hypotheses?
Yeah, so it's in that case, we were doing that mapping with the team that managed the service, and so we were mining the data we were mining the knowledge that team had. And so that was the best data that we had. I would call those hypotheses, right? Some of them were obvious, like when people show up to meetings, the project goes well. Okay. Some of them, and some of them were more kind of in the guesswork kind of stage. But they're hypotheses and they need to be validated. So our assumption is if we get people to come to meetings, the projects go better and net promoter score will improve. But it takes some work, and going back to Craig's question, being able to measure the impact on net promoter score, that's slow, right? Because these projects take 3 to 6 months to complete. So yes, the mapping, you're putting your Post-it notes up there. Some of these you may know, especially if you have data and analytics that you can bring to that session. If you have data analysts, data scientists working on your team who really are helping you build knowledge of what's going on in the system, you use that data. But as a team, you want to be honest with yourself and say, like, this is our best guess. We may have to go and validate even this guess about our business. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a couple of comments as well from Andrea. So Andrea says here we're looking for a stable product structure, and then there's a follow-up message. For instance, using Lean Canvas to prioritize our backlog. So the Lean Canvas is something that we cover in the Scrum.org product owner workshop. There's a business model canvas, there's a Lean Canvas, and I like to think of the lean canvas as can we build a business out of this kind of thing? But it does have an element of, is there a product here? But in the Lean UX workshops, we focus more on the Lean UX canvas, which is where we have a number of assumptions: the business problem statement, what are the outcomes the business is trying to achieve, what are the proto-personas, the users, customers who are going to be using this, what kind of problems are they trying to solve, what potential solutions do we have. While you can do that as well with a customer value proposition, the Lean UX approach would be to use the Lean UX canvas, as far as I understand it. Joshua, do you have any comments on that?
I honestly, I'm not sure I understand the question here from Andrea.
I think it's more a comment than a question.
Okay.
Yeah. So Corrado says, I have a go. Thank you for these insights. Thank you, Corrado. And Pradeep came back and said, cool. Thanks, Josh. And I'm just looking now to see, do we have any more questions?
Looks like there's a couple of questions at the bottom, one from Matteo and one from Eric.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you decide when you have enough of a specific user behavior to say you're successful? Using your example, how many people coming to meetings you need to say your experiment worked?
Yeah. So that's a little bit of a judgment call. It's a little bit of a judgment call. So, for example, I'm trying to think of which story to tell you, and I'm stuck between two stories. You kind of want to say, you want to talk about this with your team. This is kind of part of the acceptance criteria of validated, right? Like, is it statistically, we've seen a bump in meeting attendance? Is it qualitatively, we saw these kinds of users starting to come to meetings? I think in some ways this resembles the scientific method, right? We're putting an experiment in the world, and then we're watching the results come in. But I'm sort of previewing Eric's question. We're not actually doing science here, right? We're not looking for a vaccine that ensures that people are immune to COVID-19. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make better, more accurate, less costly business decisions. So some of this is about setting a baseline with our team and deciding, when we've hit that baseline, do we feel good about it, or do we need to continue on this path? So, for example, I might say to the, I might do an initiative that says, look, our current rate of, our key business measure is 19%, and we're going to increase it, right? We're going to increase it to 25%. What does that mean? That's a conversation with stakeholders. Is 25% meaningful to you? Is it worth, spending, a quarter of the team's time on going from 19 to 25? What would make that work worth doing? Do we have to get to 50 or 75? So it's hard to, there's no kind of specific measure, but it really is about kind of setting a mark with your team, and then and kind of understanding what's meaningful in that context.
Okay, Eric had a follow-up statement as well. I mean, it's rarely as simple as 5 boxes lining up in a nice row. Human behavior is messy, and it's hard to prove the result.
Yeah. I think that goes along with his previous comment. The world is seeking the right behaviors that lead to the impact of stopping the spread of COVID-19. Hard without fast feedback loops, but that's often the case. Complexity and little data, how to untangle. I mean, that's the challenge of product development. I mean, the stakes are rarely as high as they are now with managing this global pandemic. But I think what we want is we want some evidence that our investment of time and effort seems to be paying off, right? So took us some weeks to start to see whether social distancing measures paid off. I think we saw that started to take probably 2 weeks, right, before we started to see that. That's the natural cycle in this case. And I think to go back to Craig's question, these kinds of things have a natural cycle. So.
Thank you. And just on that as well, Eric, I last week I gave a talk on Kanban for complexity, and I referred to the Kinevin sense-making framework, and we talked about COVID-19, and I gave a view, and there was a bit of a discussion about how to handle that. And the reality is that COVID-19 is in different problem spaces at the same time. The hand washing is kind of clear. The scientists are giving us the numbers every day, so that's complicated, trusting the experts. Bill Gates is doing his experiments in the vaccine, so that's deeply complex, and that would Lean UX could probably help in that space, but there's lots of good stuff already happening in the scientific space, so it would be complementary. If anything, wouldn't want to be stopping doing what they're doing already. Then you've got the initial lockdown in Italy was probably a sign of doing something, which luckily seemed to have worked. And at the moment, we seem to be a bit operatic. We're kind of standing back, kind of saying, almost like WTF, like how do we get out of this lockdown and what's the next step? So COVID-19 is a really messy thing, and I spoke about that for 20 minutes last week. So
I will say, I'm sorry, John. I will say that if you look at the logic model framework in the context of the kind of nonprofit world, it lives inside a kind of a bigger framework called the theory of change. And so the theory of change sort of you're right, Eric, that it's not, that there's 5 boxes and they feed into each other in a linear and deterministic way. There's lots of boxes and they're all related to each other. And the theory of change is sort of a way of dealing with all of those kind of logical relationships. But yeah, I mean, there's no, it's not a machine that, you drop a coin in the slot and, all those things happen like
Exactly. Yeah, it's messy. Bit of chaos, sometimes bit of nice chaos, sometimes not so nice chaos. Got another question. I got 2 questions. One on the private chat window from Craig, which I'll come to in a minute, Craig, and got one here from Nicholas. So in your experience, how long does it typically take for a large organization like more than 1,000 employees to transition towards outcomes over outputs? What, if any, are effective ways to accelerate this process?
So I don't think that I've ever seen an organization completely transition, and nor do I think that you'd always want to transition completely, right? I mean, I think there's a place for output-based planning. When you know what you have to do and it's predictable, you just do it, right? You schedule the work and you do it. And that's about execution of kind of repetitive, highly predictable tasks. And so I think part of that transition is to understand kind of what are the different kinds of work in any large organization, and to adopt the right approach depending on the organization. I worked with a very large bank here in the US a couple of years ago. And we were working on kind of what a lot of people call organizational agility. So how do you achieve an agile organization outside of the context of product development or software development? Thanks, Pradeep. And so we were working not just with the product organizations or the tech organizations, but also the legal organization, legal, marketing, risk and compliance, things like that. And so I was lucky to be working with the legal team. And one of the things that we had to do was we had to say, let's look at the portfolio of work and say, where do we have highly predictable work, right? Where do we have work that's unpredictable and sort of bespoke? And where do we have work where we can take this kind of agile test and learn approach? And we were able to sort of do an analysis and say, there are these different kinds of categories of work handled by different organizations within the legal group. And for some of them, it made sense to kind of transition to kind of more outcome-based ways of working, whereas others were really working on like just predictable business as usual. So I didn't really answer your question about how long it takes, because I've never seen an organization transition completely. But I will say it's not a fast thing, and it's sort of like it's one of those kind of continuous improvement journeys rather than a journey with a destination.
Yeah, I would start small and just build from there, and probably more important to make sure the change is fairly deep so that it sticks. And as you say, continuously improve from there. Also, a question from Craig, who's on he's actually on StreamYard, so I'll just throw it up here. So I like to use the business model canvas, Lean UX canvas. They're the closest resources I can find to step-by-step guide. Are you aware of any other resources? I got clipped off there. There's a great book by Don McGrail and Ralph Yockum from Scrum.org. They wrote a book called The Professional Product Owner, and that's a pretty good book. It helps you actually to pass your PSPO1, and actually I think it helps you to pass your PSPO2 as well. So it's a very practical book. I really enjoyed reading that. That's probably the best resource I can offer for now, Craig. Joshua, do you have any books in mind or websites that maybe Craig could look at?
Craig, just to clarify, are you looking for resources on using the Lean UX canvas and the business model canvas, or are you looking for other models like that?
I'm going to bring Craig in, actually. It could be easier to bring him on camera.
Okay.
Craig, you're up.
Yeah, hi Josh. So I suppose a lot of people in the organization like to almost be told step by step. So I've had limited success with just displaying the canvas, and even though the detail on it is good, and it does step through step 1, step 2, step 3, it feels like there's still something missing. So I've not come across anything that almost walks you through as almost like a dummy's guide to outcomes over output, maybe.
Yeah.
That kind of material that can help others that maybe haven't done research in that area.
Yeah. So I will say that, since I'll give a shout out to the Business Model Canvas crew, Alex Osterwalder and his team. I'm a big fan of his books. His latest book is, or the latest book in that series is David Bland's book. I'm a former Testing Business Ideas. That's a terrific book, specifically about the testing and validation activities. So I think his books do a good job of explaining that. It's interesting, the Lean UX Canvas, we actually developed that after the second edition of Lean UX, the book, came out. And so we are just in the early stages of, you heard it here first, we're in the early stages of the third edition of Lean UX. And that book will have more complete coverage of the Lean UX canvas. In the meantime, this is going to sound like a plug, but I will tell you that Jeff and I run workshops on how to use the Lean UX canvas, and we can tell your teams exactly how to do it.
I think a colleague might be joining one. Is there one in May?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's. I've encouraged her to get that booked up. So
that's good. So yeah, that's right now. I would say that the sort of the resources there are. I don't have a book to offer you yet, but stay tuned. It'll be there.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on again, Craig. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. All right, Joshua, I'm just checking in now, and I think we're almost there. I think we are there. I don't see any other comments coming in. I'm just going to give people one more minute if they've got any further questions. I'm just scanning back as well in case I forgot to highlight anybody's messages. Just apologies if I have forgotten. Someone, Tarek said nice session, so well, thank you, Tarek, for that. And I'm just checking, are there any other messages that I've missed? And I hope I haven't. And Corrado says he likes the idea of delivery versus discovery. Thank you. And Yeah, I think we're pretty good. Matthew Robbins says many thanks. And yeah, I think we're there. So I'm just going to go check at the bottom. I don't see any new messages in, so I think we're good. So Joshua, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate that, and it was really nice. It was like 1 hour 20 minutes. Who would have thought, right? Talking about Lean UX. It's brilliant.
Yeah, that's great. Well, John, listen, thank you so much for having me on, and everybody who listened in and asked questions. Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I got another thank you from Andrea as well. Thank you guys for the terrific webinar. It sounds Trumpian, I know. Matthew saying the same. We'll leave people put in their comments. Thank you so much, Matthew. Brilliant session. Ahmad saying the same. So I'll just give it another 30 seconds in case more messages come through, but I think we're good.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Over now.
Take care.
Keep safe. Keep saying as well. Okay, bye-bye.